In part one of our special Halloween episode, Gary Michael Vasey rejoins me on the show to share some of the spookiest ghost stories that he has included in his recent book, Scary Best of My Haunted Life 2. And in part two, I have a special guest joining me. Dorie Guerra will be joining me, and we're going to be sharing listeners' ghost stories, and we're also going to be sharing a few of our own spooky ghost stories. So strap in, get ready for a great Halloween episode. If you haven't been over to the website, please head over to Passion, the number 4, theparanormal.com, and on there you can catch up with past episodes. You can also share your paranormal experience with us. If you have a spooky ghost story you'd like to share with us, if you have any other sort of strange paranormal experience, UFO encounter, Bigfoot sighting, anything like that, you can share on the webpage. Please feel free to do so. And you can also access links to books from past guests and other things, documentaries, that sort of thing. So some cool things you can do on the website. If you haven't been over to the Facebook page, please join us on there at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal. And make sure you like and follow us there. If you're using iTunes, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, and you also rate and review the show, because that helps us grow listeners and helps the show to keep moving forward. Whatever other podcast app you may be using, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if they do offer a review, please take a second to offer a review of the show. All right, so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this special Halloween episode. Just one more comment. If you know of a coworker, friend, or a family member who you think would like to tune into the show, please share a link with them so that they can check it out. And once again, thank you so much for tuning into the show. And we're going to go ahead and take it away and get into this special Halloween episode. Okay, so my guest is Gary Michael Vasey, and he collects true stories of ghostly encounters, poltergeists and hauntings, and other paranormal topics like the black-eyed kids, which we talked about during his last appearance on the show. And he's joining me today to talk about some of the stories from his recent Kindle books, Motel Hell and The Scary Best of My Haunted Life 2. Welcome back to the show, Gary.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you back on. Last time we were talking, we talked about the Black-Eyed Kids book, and that was kind of a frightening topic, but it sounds like in your newest books you've got other frightening tales and stories that have been shared with you that are quite interesting as well. But if you could kind of take us back to how you got started in all this, how you got started about collecting and writing about ghost stories and the paranormal.
Yeah. Well, of course, growing up in Yorkshire, England, I had one of those childhoods where I experienced a lot of stuff that at the time I rather wish I didn't. So we had a poltergeist in the house for many years whilst I lived there. My first ghost incident was waking up in my bedroom, which I shared with my middle brother. And I mean, we're in the second story of a traditional, sort of British home, a smallish house by most American standards. And I'm looking at a desk that my father had built for us in like a fitted wardrobe. So everything's modern. And there's a white shape sitting there. And I sit bolt upright in bed. And as I look at this white shape, I realize that it's dressed like a cavalier from the English Civil War, the royalist with the big hat, and he's writing feverishly with a quill. Well, I screamed my head off, and my brother woke up, and we both watched this cavalier guy finish what he was writing, stand up, walk across the room, straight out the window, and disappear. And this is the second story. My father came in, and we told him the story, and he laughed about it and thought it was funny. But he did some research on the house and discovered that actually all the houses in that area were built on the old grounds of an estate. And at the time of the English Civil War, the Royalist Army had come through to Hull, close to where I lived, and had been denied entry into the city of Hull by the parliamentary forces in the town. And there were a bunch of skirmishes in the area. So, in fact, even though it was a relatively new home, and this was the second story, having a cavalier in the bedroom wasn't so far-fetched from a historical perspective. But that scared the life out of me. And after that, the poltergeist activity started. I think we talked a little bit about that last time, but I would come home from school. I had a set of keys. I'd let myself in the front door. I'd put the keys on the window ledge in the hall, and I'd go off and maybe wash my hands and then start my homework or something. And then when I went back for the keys, they were nowhere to be found. And I'd look all over the house for these keys. You know, my mum and dad would look, my brothers would look, and a day later they'd turn up in the bathroom sink upstairs. So things were moving around the house. There was groans and footsteps and creaks and sighs and all kinds of strange noises at night. And this continued through my sort of college days, and I was just a nervous wreck. I mean, I was scared to sleep in the dark. I was scared of the dark because I was always seeing things and experiencing things. And most of my books include some personal recollections about things that happened to me, which we'll come back to in a minute. And then later in life, you know, I got wrapped up in marriage, kids, career, all that kind of stuff, moved to the US, spent 22 years in Texas. And I started studying magic, real magic, like a Harry Potter school of magic, out of the UK. And, you know, part of that was learning how to meditate and you know, certain ritual techniques, etc., to sort of stabilize and your environment and mind. And I decided that it might be a good idea. For some reason, I decided to write a book about how this magic course had benefited me in terms of overcoming my fear of the dark and the fear of flying and all this kind of stuff. So I wrote this book called Inner Journeys back in 2005, and it was published by Pop Publications, which is a sort of magical book publishing company in the UK. And I started out by telling some of these stories of things that happened to me as a kid with ghosts and poltergeists and stuff like that. And people read the book, and I think they kind of liked the whole thing. But one or two of them said to me, "Hey, those ghost stories are pretty good. You should maybe consider just, you know, fleshing them out and making a book about that." So one day I did exactly that, and I wrote My Haunted Life, which I put out on Kindle. It sold really well. So then I'm thinking to myself, well, hell, I've run out of stories. I can't think of any other things that happened to me. So I started talking to friends and relatives. You know, have you ever seen a ghost? Have you ever seen a UFO? Anything strange? And I collected a whole bunch of stories from relatives and friends. And My Haunted Life 2 was the result of that. And this one was a bestseller on Amazon.com in the supernatural category. So by now, you know, I'm thinking, hey, this is a lot of fun. I'm no longer frightened by this stuff. I'm enjoying collecting these stories. How can I collect stories more broadly? So I started a website called myhauntedlife2.com, and that's how the last one is, the scary best of My Haunted Life, myhauntedlife2.com. And so it's really a play on the book, but obviously since then I've either written many more books or put out many more edited sets of stories that I've collected. And amongst them, of course, was the whole Black-Eyed Kids thing, which, as we covered last time, I'd never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids until a story came in from somebody about Black-Eyed Kids. And it was the only time, I swear, it's the only time that a story someone submitted scared me. To the point where that evening after reading it, I didn't look out the window, and I stayed awake for ages waiting for a knock on the door. And, you know, it really, really got to me. And so I really got into the Black-Eyed Kids, and I wrote a couple of books. One which was sort of like Your Haunted Life 3, The Black-Eyed Kids. And then I added to it and put it out as Chilling Tales, a sort of compilation. Chilling Tales of Black-Eyed Kids. And I have to laugh because the first one, which is 3/4 of the second book, if you want, has, you know, almost perfect reviews, all fives, and quite a few of them, and sold well. Then when I put the compilation out with more material and more content, most of the reviews were good, but I got one review which really threw me for a loop because the guy said, 1 star, this book starts, ends, starts, ends, starts, and ends. He's put the same stuff in 3 times. There must be some kind of a mistake. And I'm reading the review thinking, I think I never realized what a compilation is. It's a compilation of 3 different pieces, 3 different books. So yes, it does start, end, start, end, start, end again. But I just thought it's funny.
Yeah. Now, how long
anyway.
had how many years have you actually had people sharing their stories on your website? How far back do you go?
I think probably for about four or 5 years now, something in that order. I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of stories on the site. Unfortunately, these days you're competing with Facebook and Reddit and social media. So to some extent, I mean, it gets about 200 visits a day, but I honestly think that should get a lot more. It's just that, as I say, I think the sort of blog website concept is dying a bit of a death due to the social media thing, where you can go to Reddit and read thousands of stories. But I think my haunted life too, there's a lot of stories, a lot of material. I think you could spend several evenings just digging into all the material, or you could go buy the books and read the stories in the books as well. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, no, and My Scary Best, this is a compilation of pretty much your scariest or most interesting stories?
Yeah, the ones I like the best, I think. Actually, what I did was I went into the back end of the website, and I knew I was going to have some repetition. Some of the stories would have appeared in different books, some of them wouldn't. But I thought, well, look, I'm going to see which stories have had the most reads, and then I'm going to select from those my particular favorites. So that was the kind of concept of it. And I mean, these days, the books don't sell thousands of copies, but they sell slowly and quite nicely over time. I'm quite pleased. For a hobby, it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy doing it. And then I get to talk on things like this, and yeah, it's good fun. So there's a sort of selection. It covers things like some of the hotel stories, which was a theme I covered in Motel Hell. It covers some of the ghost sex stories, which are in the ghost sex book that I did. It has a few black-eyed kid stories in it. And then it has some other stories, some of which have never appeared before and some of which have probably been in some of the other compilations. But the whole idea is these are the strangest and scariest stories that I could find on the website, in my opinion. Other people may disagree.
Right. Now, do you still have paranormal experiences to this day?
I'm sorry?
Are you still having paranormal experiences to this day?
Occasionally, I do, yes. Occasionally. I still practice the meditation, and I still have a lot of friends in the magical community. And I find that pursuing meditation and doing some of the ritual things like the pentagram ritual on a daily basis really sort of keeps my life to some extent in balance. So I think a lot of paranormal activity happens when your life is out of balance and when you're emotionally out of balance. And I think that what is happening is that there are multiple realities, that there are entities in those other realities, and those entities play on your emotions. They feed off of your negative emotions like fear, anger, and jealousy. Well, fear in particular. It's like food to them. It's like a vampire thing. So if you're frightened and if you're emotionally out of balance, drinking a lot, maybe taking drugs, or just being generally depressed, you're more likely, I think, to suffer some kind of paranormal activity than if you're well balanced, happy, and so on. And I think I said last time, perhaps, but my father taught me a trick when he was alive, which was if you are frightened during a paranormal experience, one way to switch off the fear energy is to get angry. And although getting angry doesn't stop everything long term, it's certainly, the fear energy is a different thing to the anger energy, and they don't particularly like the anger energy. So if you get angry, usually that will stop some of the paranormal activity if you're being plagued by it. But occasionally I'm caught off guard. I mean, I just recently, for example, I hadn't thought about the black-eyed kids in weeks, months. And I live alone, single guy, and I'm laying in bed, and I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning one night because there's a very loud knock on my door. And the first thing that enters my head is, holy shit, excuse the language, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone's knocking on my door. And then that fear suddenly rushed through my body. Oh, my goodness, black-eyed kids. And, totally ridiculous, really, because I live in a block of apartments. They'd have to get through the main door and to my front door. But there I was, lying in bed in the dark, scared to death didn't get out of bed, and I started to think about getting angry to try to switch off the fear, and eventually there was no other noises, there was no other knocking, and I went back to sleep again. But this has happened several times now. Something is trying to attract my attention at 2 o'clock in the morning by knocking on my door, and I can assure you there's nobody outside of my door. I think in the hotel book. I also put in a couple of experiences I had. Well, one experience I had recently where I had a client in Rotterdam in Holland, and I flew out to Rotterdam. I arrived fairly late in the evening, and they booked me into a very nice hotel right on the dockside in an old warehouse where the steamers used to go to America with all the people leaving Europe to emigrate to the US. Of course, they'd never get in these days, but back then it was the thing to do. And this hotel, these warehouses were converted into a hotel, and the room was beautiful. I mean, the decor was playing off of this emigrant theme, a bit oldie-worldy. And there was a big old wardrobe, massive wardrobe in the corner, very heavy thing. And I went into the room and I started unpacking. And I thought, I hear this sort of peculiar, it sounded like a cross between knocking and dripping, like some water dripping, but knocking. And it seemed to be coming from this old wardrobe. So I went over to the wardrobe and I opened the wardrobe. I looked in to see if there was a hanger moving or the floor had moved or something that would explain this noise. And as I got to the wardrobe, the noise stopped. And I couldn't find anything in the wardrobe, so I went back to unpacking and the noise started again. Well, now the hairs on the back of my head start going up, and I start getting the feeling I get when something's not right. I'm very sensitive to this sort of thing. I go back to the wardrobe, I have another look. I did this about 3 times, and each time, whenever I get to wardrobe, the noise stops. Whenever I back away and go back to doing what I was doing, the noise starts again. So I thought to myself, it's not good. I'm never going to be able to sleep in this room. So I lifted up the phone. I said, excuse me. You're going to need to move me from this room because there's a strange noise coming from the wardrobe. It's very annoying and aggravating. I'm not going to be able to sleep. I didn't tell them I'm scared. I just told them there's a strange noise and I can't sleep in this room. Okay, very good, sir. We'll send somebody up. So 5 or 10 minutes goes by and I'm still freaking out in this room because every time I sit on the bed, the wardrobe's making this strange noise. And whenever I go to the wardrobe, it stops. And my senses are telling me that there's a presence in the room and it's not very pleasant. And eventually there's a knock on the door. It took ages for them to come up. And I go to the door and I open it and I stand there expecting the person to come in to inspect this wardrobe, I mean, after all, if you complain about a noise and want to move rooms, surely they're going to check that your story's bona fide. And this woman wouldn't even come in the room. She said, yes, we know, we'll move you. And she wouldn't step in the room at all. So I packed up my stuff and I left that room. She showed me another room. It was identical to the one I'd just been in. I said, look, is there another hotel around here I can stay in because I'm not staying here? And she said, I don't blame you, sir, but that room is very haunted. No, none of the staff dare go in it. So yeah, I'm still having experiences.
That's interesting because they already knew the room was haunted. Yet some hotels you'd think that they would just bar the door and not let any guests stay there anymore. In that case, but it's interesting that they already knew about this, and on top of that, they were afraid to even walk or step foot inside the room.
Yeah, it was weird. And that experience, I started writing. I wrote that for the website, I think, and then I thought to myself, well, I wonder if there are reviews. I found 1 or 2 reviews on what's it called, TripAdvisor.com, that were a bit odd, about ghosts, experiencing ghosts while staying at hotels. I thought, I wonder if there's a treasure trove of little ghost stories in review sites like Yelp and TripAdvisor. So I Googled around a couple of nights and I found literally hundreds of reviews that were either really scary or downright laughable in terms of, the story that the guest had to tell about the hotel. So that Motel Hell book came out of my experience of that hotel and the one in Scotland, which I can tell you about in a minute, a few years ago, and sort of dipping into reviews of hotels by people and finding all these strange reviews about, how they were woken up in the middle of the night by the faucets coming on in the bathroom, the TV coming on, going on and off by itself, things moving around the room, dark shadows, people sitting on them and not allowing them to move, or the bed clothes being pulled off them in the middle of the night. Which, if you're in a strange place, that's scary stuff. I mean, it sounds not so scary when we're talking about it in the cold light of day, but imagine you're in a strange hotel room and you wake up in the middle of the night, the TV's on, and you switched it off, and someone just pulled the covers off you and you saw a dark shadow,
Yeah, absolutely.
Not good stuff.
No, I stayed at a hotel. It's called the Victor Hotel, and it's an old mining town, Victor, Colorado. I had some strange experiences there, but I was asking for them. I was hoping to experience them. I'm a paranormal investigator. Right. And I actually did a video on it. So I think that's a different, mindset, because I'm really hoping to experience things. Although I will say I was alone in the hotel. A couple of things that happened in the middle of the night. There was a little bit of creep factor involved there. But, again, I'm looking for it and hoping to capture some sort of activity. Whereas you're staying in a hotel and you're just wanting to get a good night's rest, and now these things are going on. That's a different experience altogether.
Yeah.
You mentioned that sharing these stories or getting these stories shared with you. Now, did that, as I'm understanding it, the way you mentioned it, did this kind of help you deal with some of the experiences of some of your own?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the way I would tell you is that actually doing all the meditation and some of the experiences that I had with meditation helped me a great deal. So, I mean, I won't say that I don't get scared, because sometimes I do, but not much scares me anymore. I'm not the kind of guy you want to go see a horror movie with, because I spend most of the movie giggling, because I just can't believe the nonsense. And I know what's coming, and, I'm very blasé about horror movies and stuff like that. But I do enjoy collecting these stories, because for every 20 stories you get that are basically, doors slamming and gusts of wind and whispering in the ear, you get one that's really, really quite good, really scary, and really makes you think. And remember, I sort of have this theory that a lot of this paranormal activity is trying to make you afraid, trying to have you throw off some fear energy that these entities, whatever they are, can feed from. So, I think a lot of it is trying to get you to be frightened. And, I've covered everything from ghosts in the machines, phones and text messaging, which there's some great stories coming about, texting and telephones and stuff like that. In fact, my phone just recently has been taking photographs by itself, which really started to have me worried until I realized that it was probably me, my watch, that was accidentally triggering. At least that's my theory. But I keep finding strange photographs on my iPhone. And there's a lot of stories about that kind of thing, texting and phones ringing with dead people, dead relatives calling from beyond, or leaving messages. So there's a whole bunch of stories about that kind of thing. I think, classic stories where the couple's driving down the road on the way out, and the woman realizes she left the phone at home. And then the husband's phone rings, and it's her phone, and he picks it up, puzzled, because she sat right next to him. And there's really just sort of sighing and strange breathing on the other end. And this happens 3 or 4 times, to the point where they begin to think maybe they got burglars. So they turn around, they go home, they run up the stairs, they find the phone is off. It's not switched on. There's no burglars. So explain who was calling and why.
Wow. Yeah.
Creepy stuff.
It is.
Using technology, that's one angle. Buildings of various kinds, so, hospitals and all of those sorts of places, jails and prisons, the typical thing you see on YouTube videos where people go investigating. Lots of stories in those sort of instances. nursing homes, where the night watchman is getting warning signs from patients in rooms that are empty and have been empty for days on end. All the stories you can possibly imagine, we've probably had in at the website at some point or other.
Yeah, and I want to get to, you mentioned your story, the experience you had at the George Hotel in Scotland, and I read that story. That was quite interesting. Can you kind of recount that?
That was about 20 or maybe 30 years ago now. I was living in Scotland with my ex-wife and three boys, and we decided to go away for the weekend and visit part of the west coast of Scotland. We went to Inverary Prison. And we left it a bit late, and we passed this pub hotel, and I said to the wife, I said, let's not drive home, we'll just see if they got a room here. And sure enough, they had a couple of rooms. One of the rooms was a beautiful sort of period room with a four-poster bed and oak panels and a separate bathroom with a bath on four legs and black and white tiles and old faucets. And my wife was, "Oh, this is really nice, I like staying here." So she stayed in there with the twin boys, my twin sons. And my eldest son and I, we stayed in a different part of the hotel, which was much more modern, in a rather typical small room with two single beds and a light in between. And we had a beer or two, dinner, went to bed because the twins were tired. And I said good night. I slept like a log. My son slept like a log, no problem at all. Come down to breakfast, and my wife is looking like a wreck. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Oh, what a night. Never slept a wink." As soon as we went to bed, we felt a presence. The covers were pulled off the bed periodically. We ended up switching the light on. The twins were convinced that there was somebody in the room. Then they saw this painting, portrait of an old man, and they said, "This is the guy that keeps pulling the covers off the bed." So they spent the entire night basically watching television with the light on, shivering in the cold. With this poltergeist and ghostly activity going on around them. Never slept a wink. I thought it was quite funny, really, but obviously she didn't. But it just goes to show you, when you check into a hotel room, you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, like I said, I had an interesting experience at the Victor Hotel, but again, I was hoping to experience it. What are some of the stories, or maybe, I know you said not a lot frightens you anymore, but aside from the black-eyed kids, because I know you said that was probably one of the most frightening topics you covered, what was the one that came the closest to really frightening you and maybe even resonated with you?
I got a story actually from somebody I know about staying in a hotel in Asia Pacific region. I'm just trying to find it actually, because I think it's in the best of. And there was a thunderstorm going on. Maybe I didn't put it in there. Anyway, no, I don't know if it's in there. Anyway, this guy stays the night. I know the man actually. He's a friend of mine. He submitted the story. He was in Asia somewhere teaching, I think, and he was in this hotel. And there was a thunderstorm going on. He's laying in bed, and of course, you keep seeing the flashing lights. And he became aware of this face looking through the window. And every time the lightning flashed, you could see the face in the lightning. And then in the dark, you could see nothing. And the face, really wasn't, he didn't know what it was. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was kind of some strange, distorted face. And he spent the entire night unable, paralyzed, couldn't sleep, watching this thing, watching him. And that story, again, in the cold light of day, it doesn't sound very scary, but I can imagine being in bed in a hotel room, absolutely terrified about what the hell it is that stood outside my window looking in. It's like that video where the guy supposedly filmed the alien popping up and looking through his window. I don't know if you've seen it, but every time I watch that video, it gives me the creeps. Not because in of itself it's a scary thing, but because I can imagine how scary it would be if you're alone in a strange place. So that's one story that really kind of worried me for a while, because What scares me is when it gets my imagination working. And I think imagination and experience are somehow related. So if you start to imagine things, you can almost bring them into your world. So it's like, when you go looking for ghosts and you go with someone who is absolutely convinced there's no such thing as a paranormal, it's all a figment of your imagination, nothing happens because that person's there and because they're not going to allow it to happen in their reality. Whereas if you go with a bunch of people that are susceptible to this sort of thing, invariably something does happen. You have an experience and you will share it because in your reality, you can accept and allow those kind of things to happen, even if sometimes they scare the living pants off you.
You shared another story in your book, and it was you were working as an IT consultant. I believe this was near Manchester. And you had another creepy encounter in a hotel room there, something to do with covers pulled off, or can you recount that?
Yeah, I was working with a company called Hoskins as an IT consultant. They sent me to Barclays Bank they have a huge IT centre in Knutsford, just outside of Manchester. So I was there week in, week out for several months, and every week it'd be a different hotel. And one time it was this hotel in the centre of Knutsford, and it had a modern wing and an old wing. And I was put in the old wing. It was an oak-panelled room with a small window with huge, very heavy curtains. And I arrived fairly late, checked in, got into bed, and I was reading a book, and I began to feel uncomfortable, and then I started to hear what seemed like rats or a mouse or some kind of animal behind the oak paneling, scratching and making noises. And I tried desperately to just discount this and not get too frightened. I didn't switch out the light, but I tried to sleep. And the covers were when you just laid there, and you can, if you haven't experienced it, you wouldn't. But imagine laying there with your eyes closed, and you can feel the covers just slowly being pulled off you, down the bed, and it gets to about your waist, and you open your eyes and think, I can't tolerate this anymore. So I got up, quite calmly, got dressed, and I went to the reception, which was just down the corridor. And it was the same sort of scenario as the Rotterdam thing. I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't sleep in this room. Oh, well, yes, no problem. We'll move you to the more modern part of the hotel. Sorry about your experience. Happens sometimes. And plainly, they just knew that there was some strange activity in that part of the hotel. I think that some people pick up on it, and some people just don't have an issue. So, they're just hoping that the person they give the room to doesn't sense what's going on. And again, it was a scary evening. I didn't like it at all, and I'm paying money for this,
Yeah, it's interesting, and again, being involved in the paranormal, there's different theories out there, and you touched on an important part of this, and I'm kind of a believer in this as well, and that is the energy you bring to the table. If it's negative energy, perhaps you're attracting that kind of energy to yourself. If it's positive energy, I think a lot of the experiences I've had, and I've had many, a lot of them were positive, but I think I was coming in with that frame of mind that I wanted to have the experience, and, I wanted to have, perhaps a genuine connection.
Yeah, I just think that if you're open to it, and I think some people are wide open because they're emotionally imbalanced, and so they're wide open, and they can be absolutely, totally abused by nightmarish experiences, whereas other people, I think, like myself, are open but protected. So, I don't, these days, touch wood, fingers crossed, all that kind of thing, I don't have necessarily awfully scary experiences. Rather, it's not in the book, but I was out of stories recently, and I recalled an event from last summer, and I put it on the website a couple of days ago, which was I went to visit a couple of friends in the UK who were also interested in esoteric, and they took me on a sort of weekend tour of a bunch of old Norman churches and other sites that had some, like barrows and stuff like this, that had some esoteric significance, and we were We were out to play, as we said. We're just out in the countryside, enjoying ourselves, exploring these churches, feeling the energies, feeling the atmospheres, that kind of thing. And one of the churches we visited had a very nice energy center, which I really enjoyed standing in. I found it by myself. They asked me, where do you think it is? And I found it because I sense this sort of stuff. And it was like bathing in warm energy. It was beautiful. And so we thought, well, we'll have lunch. We'll just sit in the sunshine outside the church. Well, of course, the church had a churchyard with graves and stuff. But we sat there, and it was a beautiful day. Bees were buzzing and birds singing and that kind of thing. And after I'd finished my sandwich, I thought I'd just get up and take a wander around and look at gravestones, because I've always been interested in family history, and I'm always on the lookout for a relative, buried or something. So I'm walking around this churchyard, and I came to this particular part of the churchyard which was really overgrown and obviously not kept, which was strange because the rest of the churchyard was very well kept, and the lawn was mowed and all this. In this corner, the lawn was not. The grass was long, the trees were overgrown, and I got this feeling of being unwelcome. And then I saw this woman. She had long, straight hair. She was wearing a blue, flowing, long Victorian-type dress, and she was looking at me very sternly, and she was waving me away with her hands. And I just acknowledged the presence. I said, okay, fine, I understand. And I backed off, and I went back to my friends, and I just said to them, just go in the corner over there, will you, and tell me what you think. And so they both looked at me puzzled, but they're used to me doing things like that. So they got up and wandered off, and they both came back and said, wow, yeah, it feels really unwelcome, and, it's kind of strange. The rest of the church feels great, and that area feels really bad. I said, well, this is what I saw. So Sue, my friend, took a couple of snaps. And when I got home after the weekend, flew home, she sent me an email, and she said, look at this photograph I took in the part of the churchyard that you were in where you thought you saw that lady. And it's a photograph of the trees. You can see the light coming through the trees. And clear as day, it's an artifact of the way the trees are, but clear as day is a woman's face in the photograph from the trees with the blue sky behind. You'd have to go to the website to see the photograph, but I tell you, it's an amazing thing. So it's like, confirmation. It's confirmation to me that I was really feeling and experiencing a presence, and that presence was female and didn't want anybody in that part of the churchyard.
Yeah, that's amazing. It seldom happens as a paranormal investigator. I've had strange sense of energy, and then I pick up something on a voice recorder, that is right about the same time. They don't happen very often, but it certainly does give you validation that whatever you're sensing or feeling is real, and that's happened to me, on a number of occasions. It's just it does, in the overall scheme of things, it just doesn't happen very often.
Right, absolutely. And well, to me, it's happened quite a bit, but not so much recently. And that was a great weekend because we went to the Hellfire Caves. You remember the Hellfire Club back in the 1800s, I think it was, or late 1700s. Some British politicians that were reputed to have orgies and satanic rituals down underground in these caves that they'd constructed. And I've written articles on the website about this, complete with photographs of the devils sort of on the walls of the cave. They carved devil faces and painted them red and stuff like this. And, I'd never been there before. And Sue and Stuart, my buddies, they'd been there. And Stuart said, well, if you don't mind, I don't think I'm going to go in. And I'm like, why? Come on. He said, well, I've been there like this, like third time. I really don't. I said, come on. Okay, fine, he says. Well, the further we went into these caves, I began to feel like I was going to puke. I mean, the energy down there was so negative and so dark. And the further we got down, the worse it got. And when you get to the end, there's a chamber there that they reputedly used for something. And we were trying to figure out what it was they'd used it for based on the energy we were all feeling. And it was at that point that Stuart said, this is why I didn't want to come down here again, because Whenever I come down here, the atmosphere and the energies just makes me feel ill for the rest of the day. And that was a horrific experience in terms of, and we didn't see anything, we didn't experience anything that set that energy feeling in the atmosphere, and it seeped into everything. I mean, you could feel this evil malevolence of whatever they'd been doing down there. I was going to say as well, in the best of, I put in a few stories of personal experiences, especially from when I was growing up and having some strange and bizarre experiences. I think one of them, it's quite a popular story on the website. It's called The Witch's Daughter. And this is really a bizarre story because A, it's strange, but B, it shows my mental state at the age of 17. Yeah. So we went on a school. I was doing A-level geology. That's like between 17 and 18 in the UK. You can do A-levels, which are the qualifications you need to go to college. So I'm doing one of my A-levels is in geology, and we got on a geology field trip down to Torquay in Devon, which is an old seaside resort. It used to be popular in the Victorian era, not so popular in recent years. And we stayed in this hotel, and the hotel sort of had a disco. I think it was like a Thursday night or something, and invited all the local kids. And so, a 17-year-old guy, I see this gorgeous 16-year-old or whatever she was. And, I obviously was attracted, as were some of the other guys, and I started dancing with her and then talking to her. And eventually we ended up sort of quite friendly. And I said, well, I'll walk you home if you want. She said, no. I said, no, it's all right, I'll walk you home. So reluctantly she agreed. We were walking home and we were holding hands and chit-chatting. And the further we went out of town, the more strange she becomes. She was getting very scared and very nervy. And I said, what the hell's wrong? And she said, well, look, my parents are witches, and sort of satanic witches, and they don't really like me getting friendly with any boys. And, occasionally I've been forced to take part in the rituals and stuff like that. And I'm really frightened, and I'm frightened for you, because if they get any idea that you're here with me and that I'm taking you to our house, something not nice will happen to you. So go, leave. Well, that was enough for me. I said, okay, fine, thanks, good night. And I left, and I went back to the hotel, laughed it off, went to bed. And I was in a room on my own. And I got into bed, and I switched out the light, and I fell asleep. And then I kind of had all these weird dreams, as I recall, and I woke up in the dark, and there's this horrible atmosphere in the room, and I'm really sweating profusely, and it's cold sweat. When you're sweating, but it's cold. It's really cold. And you can feel the sweat dribbling down your skin like ice. And I can see these two red eyes in the corner of the room. And at first I'm thinking, no, I'm seeing things. But there were two red eyes staring at me, and this feeling, this growing feeling. So I start praying and imagining light around me. And it just got worse and worse and worse. It wasn't seeming to help. And I'm praying like anything. And all of a sudden, in the other corner of the room, there's a glow suddenly appears, but it was a beautiful glow. It was calming. It was like a bluish glow. And I saw in this glow a young man stood there in a blue soldier's uniform. The man looked at me, looked in the corner of the room, waved its hand in a sort of nonchalant manner and said, "Be gone." And all of a sudden, the dawn light comes through the crack in the curtain. There's this smell like roses in the room. And I was fine. It was the most bizarre experience.
Wow, that sounds like you had a guardian angel perhaps that night.
Oh, yeah, that's my guardian angel. Yeah, I know that now. But it was an amazing, it's amazingly strange. If I told that to normal people, they look at me like, are you crazy? You need locked up. But it really happened, and it really happened like that. And it's one of those stories or experiences that reassures me that we've always got an ally. We're always protected. If we need protection, it's always there. If we need help, it's always there. We just have to ask. Plainly, I had upset somebody not very nice that evening.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Can you talk a little bit, because this is covered in the Scary Best, and this is a famous hotel, famous haunted hotel, and that is the Stanley Hotel. And you've got a story you share in the book that guests had experienced at the famous room 217. Now, this was the room that inspired Stephen King to write the book The Shining. Yeah. And so that was an interesting story. Could you talk just a little bit about that one?
Yeah, and that one is one of the most popular stories on the website in terms of traffic. It gets a few hits every day of the week. It was a young lady and partner staying in room 217 at Stanley Hotel in Colorado, and she basically wrote in with several experiences that they had while they were staying there. And again, I'm not sure that they're necessarily scary, but interesting paranormal experiences, in the sense that they heard outside the room in the early evening what seemed to be like room service with a trolley. Immediately opened the door to see who it was. Nobody there. No one down the corridor. No sign of any room service or a trolley. There was a big bang sometime in the morning that woke them up. Even she describes the guy she's with as a heavy sleeper. He woke up as well. And it sounded like somebody picked up a large object and then literally slammed it on the floor. But, they thought that perhaps they were the only ones that heard this noise, but they heard other guests up and around at the hotel whispering about, what did you hear that noise? What was it? Sort of worried that maybe there'd been an explosion and whatever, something to cause the noise. In the end, they went back to sleep. When they woke up in the morning, they had a bottle of, I think, Coca-Cola or something. I can't remember the exact brand, but they had a bottle that somehow managed to fall in the floor in the middle of the night, but wasn't the cause of the bang. It wasn't loud enough. And, they had conversations with people who also heard the bang and from the room directly above and that sort of thing. One person described it like a large barrel falling, that kind of thing. So they had quite an interesting evening staying in that room. But I think the most interesting one was that she claimed to have woken up in the early hours of the morning after the loud bang and hear a woman chuckling or laughing just centimeters from her ears in the room. And that was the thing that frightened her. And I tell you what, out of all the experiences, that would be the thing that frightened me. And there's a lot in those ghost hotel stories. One of the common themes of haunted hotels seems to be having the covers pulled off of you, the TV coming on and going off, the faucet in the bathroom coming on by itself, and being whispered to or spoken to centimeters from your ear by a voice from nowhere. All very pleasant things to happen if you just paid $120 to stay in a hotel and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I don't remember what the talk show was, but Jim Carrey had experience in that very room. I don't remember if it was Jay Leno. This is many years ago, probably almost 20 years ago. It was about 20 years ago or 20 plus years ago when he was filming Dumb and Dumber. And he actually went down to the desk and told them, I need to get checked out of this room. Story goes, he didn't know about that room had some history and that it was haunted. But I thought that was interesting because I stayed at the Stanley Hotel many years ago on third floor. Nothing ever happened. Me and my wife didn't have any experiences. But there does seem to be something to that room, and I just thought that was interesting when you had a story specifically about that room. And Jim Carrey had apparently some frightening experiences, and he wouldn't even cover details about it other than he was going down to the front desk, asking him to get him another room, and he wanted to check out of there.
I never had the opportunity to go there. I was in Colorado many, many times. I mean, as you know, I lived in the U.S. for 20 odd years. I'm a U.S. citizen even. And one day I hope to get back because I got 3 boys in Texas that I haven't seen for quite some time now. Being normal Americans, 2 of them don't even have a passport, so there's not much chance of them coming to see me.
Interesting. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you, you've covered a lot of stories on the Black-Eyed Kids, so maybe we could finish up with perhaps one of your most chilling Black-Eyed Kid story.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's tons and tons of Black-Eyed Kid stories, and it's really difficult sometimes to pick the scariest because, quite honestly, this is the category that gets me the most. From, I think we covered it last time, from the woman leaving Walmart who sees a homeless man who looks up at her and calls her by name, and when she looks down at this homeless guy, he's got totally black eyes, and how the hell does he know her name? To I think the story of the salesman. So this story, there's a sort of teenage kid in a house with his father, and there's a knock at the door, and they're not expecting anybody. The kid looks through the keyhole and sees this very strange, pasty-faced guy stood on the doorstep and becomes quite frightened. Tells his dad there's someone on the doorstep, so the father goes to the door, opens the door, and sure enough, there's this man stood on the door with a bag, and very pale face, don't really see his eyes initially, and he says, can I come in? And the father says something like, well, why are you here first? He says, you have to invite me in, otherwise I can't come in. And the man says, well, yeah, but why are you here? Oh, I've got some things to sell to you. So by now, the son is really quite frightened, by this man, and he sees the black eyes. And the father says, okay, well, fine, come on in, show us what you've got. And the guy comes in and starts talking to the father. But the whole time, he's staring at the kid, never takes his eyes off the child. And the child is freaking out. And even the mother noticed, that the guy seems to have eyes only for the child. And after a while, the father throws the man out because he never opens the bag. He never shows anything that he's got for sale. He's just stood there telling him he's got something. Would you like to buy something? But I guess it's a kind of frustrating conversation. So he eventually throws him out, closes the door. The kid gets up, runs over and looks out the door, and there's nobody there. Just completely disappeared in milliseconds, this man with black eyes and a bag, purportedly being a door-to-door salesman. So, of course, the son is now very, very frightened. And sure enough, a few days later, he's home alone. And there's a knock on the door. And he goes and he looks through the keyhole, and there's this same guy. And he's absolutely terrified because he's obviously very, very frightened about what this man wants and who he is with black eyes and a pale face and this sort of terrifying presence. So he basically just ignores the banging on the door for a few minutes. And then it all goes quiet, and he looks out the door and opens the door. And again, within a matter of seconds, this person has disappeared. And I think that's a really scary story because, what's the fixation with the child? What is he looking for? And at a certain era in the United States, even in the UK, actually, the door-to-door salesman was a regular feature of life, right? So there is this black-eyed man masquerading as a salesman, showing up on people's doorsteps and just disappearing into thin air. And there's no, what does he want? Who knows? He never really says. He wants to enter. He's granted permission to enter, but once he's allowed to enter, he does nothing except stare at the child in a malevolent way.
Chilling indeed.
I don't know about you, but that scares me.
Yes. And in fact, when we did do that episode on the Black-Eyed Kids, I did certainly have this fear that I was going to get the knock on the door late one night. Hasn't happened yet, and I hope it.
Say that once you've heard of them.
that stuck with me. That statement right there you mentioned at the end of our discussion on that stuck with me. So I had that in my head, thinking, well, Gary did say once you've heard of them, they can show up at your doorstep, but thank goodness they haven't showed up, and I hope they don't ever, because I'm not opening the door for them.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about these stories. These are fascinating stories. If people want to share their stories with you, can you just, for the listener, remind us where they
Sure.
need to go?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's myhauntedlife2.com, www.myhauntedlife2, Too, as in my haunted life as well, as opposed to two, myhauntedlife2.com. And if you go there, every story, at the bottom of every story, you can enter your own, submit it. And sometimes if we get a really good story, I give a prize of a book, usually an audio book, that kind of thing. But much appreciate any traffic, any visitors, anybody with any stories. I love these stories. I enjoy collecting them, and very welcome to come visit the website. And of course, if you go to Amazon, G. Michael Vasey, I write under G. Michael Vasey, G. Michael Vasey, and you'll find all my books on there. And I'm sure you'll find, I've got enough out now that I'm sure there's something for everybody, from Ghosts in the Machines to paranormal sex to black-eyed kids to haunted places.
Yeah, and interesting stories, and all coming up on the heels of Halloween. So fun stuff to talk about. I love hearing these stories. And once again, Gary, thank you so much for joining me on the show again. And we'll look for any work you may have coming out down the road, and maybe we can talk again.
Yeah, sounds good. Anytime, just let me know.
All right. Hey, you have a great day, Gary, and thanks again. Okay, so welcome everybody to part 2 of our show, and this is where we're going to be talking about ghost stories and sharing some of our own stories and sharing some listener stories that they've shared on the website and the Facebook page. And I've got a special guest joining me on the show again, and it's Dorie Guerra. She is a fellow paranormal investigator, and she's also my sister-in-law, and she loves Halloween, and it's one of her favorite times of year. Dorie, thank you so much for joining me on the show to talk about some of these great ghost stories.
Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. And this is a fun time. We get to kind of have fun and just share some stories. And some of these listener stories are really interesting. Now, they're not all ghost stories. Now, a couple of these are Bigfoot stories, and we actually have a UFO story to share as well. Actually, a couple of stories, and those will be fun as well. I think the Bigfoot stories have some creep factor in them, so I think they're still fun to share, and I think hopefully the listeners here will enjoy these stories as well. But I want to get started with a story that I have, and when I was a young kid, I can't say that I really had any true paranormal experiences, but I did have a strange experience when I was a very young teenager. And one of the things we used to do is, I was probably a little bit less supervised than I should have been when I was a young kid. And a friend of mine and my big brother were out on our BMX bikes on a summer night. And we were out very late one night. I mean, this is probably well past midnight. And we decided it would be a good idea to go up to the Ogden Cemetery and ride our bikes up there. And Dorie, you've been to the Ogden Cemetery.
Yes, I have.
It's an interesting place, and there's a lot of tales there and a lot of interesting stories from Ogden Cemetery. But way back when, and we're talking early 80s here, I'm aging myself, there were these, in the middle of the cemetery, there was kind of this roundabout in the cemetery, and there were these gargoyle-looking statues, and they were really creepy looking. And so we were kind of doing a dare with one another to go in the cemetery on our bikes. And the story was, if you rode around in circles around these gargoyles, like statues, that their eyes would follow you. And so that's exactly what we decided to do. So we ride into the cemetery late at night. Again, it was at least past midnight. I don't remember the exact time. It was very late. Much later than teenage boys should have been riding their BMX bikes around in a cemetery. But anyways, we ride into the cemetery, and we go into this roundabout, and we're riding our bikes around, and I'm looking at these gargoyle-looking statues, and it looks like the eyes are following us. And it's pretty creepy because I think it's just kind of an optical illusion. As you're riding around in the circle, it kind of looks like the eyes are following you. And we're all kind of saying the same thing. Wow, this is creepy. It looks like they're really watching us, and the eyes are moving. And so we circle around these statues for a good 5-10 minutes. And I don't know if we kind of got creeped out, or we just decided it was time to pedal on. And so we decide to pedal on to other parts of the cemetery, and we're pedaling on, and I think I was in the front, if I remember right. Again, this is many, many years ago. And I stop on my bike, and I look over at my brother and my friend, and I said, "You guys hear that?" And they stop and say, "Hear what?" And I said, "There is an organ playing." And this is like a really creepy, like church organ you would hear, like maybe at like a Catholic church or something. And keep in mind, it's well past midnight, and they start to hear it too. And we're all really getting creeped out by this time, because we're thinking, there's nobody else in the cemetery. It's well past midnight, and we're hearing some weird organ playing. And so, of course, the first thing we did was got the hell out of the cemetery. We pedaled out of there. We got creeped out. Again, it was kind of a dare, and we wanted to go in the cemetery and ride around. And then once we heard that, I think we were pretty much done. And I don't know that I ever went back to ride my bike around the cemetery ever again at that. It was kind of a creepy experience, especially as a young teenager. So that's my story about the Ogden Cemetery. Now, Dorie, I think you got a kind of an interesting story to share as well.
I do. I'm not an Ogden native. So when I moved here, I kept hearing stories about a very famous character in the cemetery by the name of Flo. There's been a lot of talk about her and the urban legend around Flo, but the story is, if you go to the cemetery and you park at a certain location, and I believe you have to flash your lights off and on a few times, all of a sudden the apparition of Flo appears. So we thought, okay, let's give it a go. And it was myself and my sister, Curry's wife. And
it's very creeped out.
Yes.
Very easily, by the way.
Yeah, she's easily scared. And my little brother at the time, he's still my brother, but my brother and two of my friends, we had just gone to a haunted attraction. It was October, the spooky season is roaring. And we thought, let's go see something really spooky. So we decided to go see Flo. And however, we did not take our car in. We thought, you know what, we're all a bunch of older women. And my brother, we're going to park outside and we're going to walk in. So we're walking into the cemetery, and there's already a vehicle parked in this certain location, and they're flipping their lights off and on. And we're walking towards them, and all of a sudden, you hear this is so funny. You hear everybody in the car scream. They are screaming their heads off, and then they just take off in their car.
Did they drive really fast?
Yes. They sped off. Like, I don't know. Like how you see in cartoons and they peel rubber. That really happened. So they took off, and we just looked at each other and thought, oh, what are we getting ourselves into? So we walk and we stand in the area where their car was parked. And like I said, we're all standing there watching. And from my recollection, what I saw from a distance, it was like a green light, like a fluorescent green light. It was circular, and it was flush to the ground. And as this light got closer to us, it got higher, and it looked like it was forming to the shape of a female skirt or dress.
Wow.
And it gets higher and higher, and I get to maybe about knee level. And one of my friends who was with us grabbed me by my collar of my shirt and pulled me and said, we're getting out of here. So I left, and I believe your wife left with us, and my brother and my friend who was visiting from out of town, they stayed behind, and we were halfway through the cemetery when they finally caught up with us. And they both described the same thing. They said, like I said, I made it to about the knees, this green light, and they both described the bust. It looked like a bust of a woman. They probably got to about the neck area, and then they took off running.
Wow, so they were a little bit more brave than you guys were now.
They were.
Now, was it my wife convincing you to exit at that time?
No, it was my friend Judy who
Oh, okay. So Judy was
she grabbed me by the neck. And however, that evening, I don't think we were the most startled in the whole cemetery. While we were walking after the whole flow incident, after seeing what we saw, we were walking towards our car, and a few of us were very scared.
Of course, naturally.
And I'm laughing my head off, and then all of a sudden, to our left, there's a rustling in the bushes, and a homeless man comes out with a bike, and we screamed.
Oh, no.
And I think we scared him more than we were scared. So yes, Flo it's a very big legend around here.
Yeah, and so like you said, the legend is you, if you're in your car, you pull up and flash your lights. I believe it is 3 times, right? And she is supposed to appear. One of the interesting things about this story is I found this is where you separate truth from fiction. Is supposedly she had been killed on the road just outside of where the cemetery is. And we have a friend of ours that actually does a lot of research on legends and stories about ghosts and stuff. And actually the girl had died of the Spanish flu was the real story. But interesting thing is, I have no reason to doubt you guys about your story because you all kind of told the same story there. I was just disappointed I wasn't there when it happened.
Well, you were probably home in bed.
I may have been. I am getting upwards in age there, Dorie. So, so those are both interesting stories we've had. There's a lot of haunted tales at Ogden Cemetery. It is an interesting place. It's a very large cemetery. But the Flo story is a story that a lot of people have told. And I think I would have been a little bit creeped out too. Now, did the image or what you guys saw of her, did it kind of have a hologram type appearance?
It did. And that's why after we saw what we saw, we then got in our car after we scared the homeless man. And we drove around the cemetery. And I was looking for anything I possibly could. Maybe somebody was reflecting a light or some type of optical illusion. Couldn't find anything. I can't say it's paranormal or not. Being an investigator.
Sure.
It sure was creepy. We all had the same story.
Right.
And then we got pulled over by the cops. And then luckily we all look like soccer moms, so we got off.
Yeah, good thing.
He's like, get out of here, ladies.
Yeah, he probably has better things to do in his time than to, arrest you guys for trespassing in a cemetery. I think back to my story when I was a young teenager and the organ playing. Perhaps somebody saw us in there and had an organ in their house and thought it would be a good prank to start playing a organ while we're out there and got us creeped out. I mean, who knows for sure, but it was certainly a creepy thing to have happen after midnight in a dark cemetery, and certainly was enough to get us to pedal our butts out of the cemetery.
Right.
You are going to share the first listener story here, Dorie, so go ahead and take it away.
Yes, this is from listener Jennifer Miller. She sent this to Curry on Passion for the Paranormal's Facebook page. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out.
Absolutely. Thanks for the plug.
This is her story. Sometimes between 3 and 4 a.m., we can smell burnt toast, or sometimes it's a floral scented women's perfume. We also hear 3 loud knocks on a closed bedroom door. When we go to open the door, nobody is there. It's a little creepy when that happens. Jennifer, I'm going to have to agree with you on that. It's very creepy.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about this story is the mention of this happening between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., which is, of course, what a lot of people like to call the witching hour. And, if I had stuff going on at that time, some people might automatically jump to the conclusion that, you've got the story about, the mocking of the Trinity, things happen in threes. But the interesting thing is it does seem to be a time of night or morning, if you want to call it that, where a lot of things happen. But I just found that interesting that this activity is going on primarily during that time frame.
Agreed.
Yeah, so if you go back to, say, a movie like the Amityville Horror, the guy keeps getting woken up at what, like 3
a.m.?
Yeah,
or is it 2 a.m.? This is too. That was the time that DeFeo murders happened.
That is possible. I could be remembering that the wrong way. Maybe it was 2 a.m. For some reason, I was thinking 3 a.m.
We'll have to double check.
Yeah, we'll have to.
I think it's 2 a.m.
And then the loud knocks on the door.
Yeah.
Wow. And then going in to answer the door and nobody's there.
Well, 3 loud knocks.
Yeah, the 3 loud knocks. So you got this activity happening between 3 and 4 a.m. and then the 3 loud knocks. Yeah, it's just a creepy story. Real short one, but it's certainly an interesting one. Thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. We appreciate you sharing that story with us. I want to share a story, Dorie, about this is early on, and this is really before I got involved in becoming a paranormal investigator. This is kind of if you want to say, a precursor to that, when I was kind of filling out the paranormal and whether I wanted to do it, and I was still really a skeptic. My wife and I had went to a ghost tour that a group was putting on. We thought, let's go check it out. They were putting on ghost tours, and basically we were walking around in this location. It was up in Brigham City, and this group was taking us around, and we were doing what we call EVP sessions, and they had flashlights going off and stuff like that. But at the end of the night, I asked the guy who was in charge of running the tour, do you know some interesting places to go visit? And he mentioned a place called Mercer. And Dorie, you've been out there with me before. It's an interesting place. So Mercer is basically an old mining town, and it is out past Tooele, Utah, ways past Tooele, Utah. It's actually in Stockton, Utah, but it's more or less out in the middle of nowhere. And it is basically, like I mentioned, it's an old mining town, but the mining town has been flattened. It's been taken over by a mining company, and the only thing left of the old mining town now is an old cemetery up on a hill. And so he told me told me about the Mercer Cemetery, and that it's a great place to visit. It's out in the middle of nowhere, so you can kind of expect to be out there and not be bothered by other people. So somehow I managed to talk my wife into going out there with me. Now, mind you, this is early November, and so, typically in Utah, we're in northern Utah, typically in early November can be a pretty cold time of year. The interesting thing is this year, it really, early November, it wasn't that cold. And so I told my wife, about this place, and she actually finally agreed to go out there with me, and it was just her and I. And if you go to Mercer, you actually have to hike up, and you remember this story, you have to hike up about a quarter of a mile up a steep hill. And you get up on top of this hill, and you're kind of looking out on this desert valley. And it's quite a view when you get up there. And however, you're up there, and there's nothing else around there. There really is nothing. I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. And we're walking around, and there's these old grave markers, and you probably remember those, the wooden slabs or the wooden stakes that are around some of these grave markers. I mean, these are graves from the early 1900s, and some of them don't even have markers. And then, some of the graves in the middle of the cemetery actually have these wooden slats as the grave markers. We're walking around there, and I had a voice recorder. We're asking questions, and again, this is before I actually really was a paranormal investigator. We're just walking around in the dark, and we walked around the perimeter as well just to make sure we were the only ones there. Well, turns out we were the only ones there. We walked around and didn't see or hear a soul in sight. And we actually probably spent a good 45 minutes to close to an hour there. And nothing was really happening. We heard a few animal noises. I think we heard coyotes and that sort of thing. And we were getting ready to leave. And there's this sign. I don't know if you remember the story, but there's a sign in the front of the cemetery. As you get to the top of the hill, it just says Mercer Cemetery. An old wooden sign. And I had a mag flashlight that I decided to set up there on top of the sign. And we had been trying the little flashlight trick where you try and get, the flashlight, you loosen the connection, and you try and get a response from the flashlight. You ask a question. Well, we'd been trying to do that. We'd been trying to do that for quite some time and weren't getting anything. And right before we're getting ready to leave, I start getting what seems to be responses on the flashlight. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And of course, my wife is, saying, oh, that's nothing. It's a loose connection or whatever. And then all of a sudden, we start hearing whistling. And when I say whistling, I don't mean whistling like a bird whistling. This was actually like somebody whistling a tune, like you might hear somebody walking down the street, casually whistling, that sort of thing. And at this point, my wife is terrified. She is absolutely terrified. And she's grabbing me by the arm saying it is time to go. So, of course, I grab my flashlight, my voice recorder, and she's practically dragging me down the hill. And so it was at that point, of course, a quick retreat. And the interesting thing is I was playing back the audio of that, and I caught that whistling on the audio recorder. And so, that's all that we had happen that night. But I would say just that alone, we're 99% certain that was not a bird whistling, and that was actually sounded like a person casually whistling. Now, early November, who's going to be out there? There's no campers. We didn't see a soul inside or hear a soul inside. We walked around the entire place, and there was nobody there. So, it's one of those where it was, wow, that's amazing. I can't believe we captured that. My wife is, of course, thinking, yeah, there's probably some squatter out there in the bushes trying to scare us. But, so that's my story, my first stories of going to Mercer. I've visited there many times since. Had some other amazing experiences there, but, it was an amazing experience to have as one of the first places I went to visit and kind of, if you want to call it investigating, I guess you can. So, Dorie, now you had a story you wanted to share, so I'll let you go ahead and take it away. That was my Mercer story.
Yeah, it's a great story. And we have had a few strange encounters there.
Yes, we have. And, maybe we'll get to those further down the line.
Yeah.
Here. We'll see how time goes.
So the story I have, it actually occurred at a place I used to work. I won't say the name. It's in Salt Lake City. That's all I'll say. And there was only 3 employees working that day. It was a little small retail shop with 1 entrance. And now, the people I work with, one of the females is sensitive to certain things. How would I say, like...
kind of like an empath?
Yes, like an empath. She's very sensitive. So, put that in the back of your head. And one day we were in the shop, and she and I were talking, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, in my peripheral vision, I saw an old man standing there. I saw him. He had this little khaki jacket on and a little khaki fishing hat. And I remember as soon as I saw him, I looked and I said aloud, "Did you see that man?" And right when I said that, the female who I was working with looked at me and said, "Look at my arm." And there was a red, like the goose pimples in the shape of a handprint on her arm. Right when I said that, she says, "Look at my arm." And it was strange because I was standing in front of her. She wasn't touching her own arm. It was just, she and I, no one had entered the store. And I saw that man plain as day. And then he was gone.
And I think you told a funny story that he had kind of a fishing looking hat.
Yeah, he looked like a little old fisherman, like grumpy old man.
Now, could you actually see fingers?
Yes. It was the shape of a handprint, and it was red. And where the handprint would be, it was like goose pimple. And it was just bizarre that I saw him, and I looked and said, "Did you see him?" And as soon as I said that, she said, "Look at my arm." And I saw that handprint on her arm.
Wow.
And after we had this little encounter, she did state, her and one of the other employees who had worked there, they started the business, said the former owner died in the shop.
Oh, wow.
Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but they said, yeah, he died in the shop.
And so was he, I'm assuming he was a fairly elderly gentleman when he passed?
I don't know. I didn't get to the bottom of that. I didn't ask questions about his age, but I thought it was very peculiar how everything happened in succession, and it was bizarre and strange, and I saw him.
Yeah,
plain as day.
It was like looking at a regular person.
Yes.
Almost, right? I mean,
Yeah.
just all kinds of detail.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. So I've never had, and you know, I envy you from that respect, because you actually saw what is a full-blown apparition. And that's so rare for people to actually see that. I've been, you know, doing paranormal investigating for going on about 6 years now, and I have never witnessed that. Now I've seen shadows and, you know, had all kinds of other strange things happen, all sorts of EVPs and disembodied voices, and been touched, but never saw a full body apparition. So I'm a little bit jealous, Dorie, that you were able to see that. But that is a cool story. That is really an interesting story. So what I'm going to do now is, and thanks for sharing that story. I think that's a good one. I've got a listener story that I'm going to share, and this comes all the way from the UK. And this was shared with me on the website by Andrew Beard. And I believe the name of the group he's a part of. He is part of a paranormal group, and he also claims to be sensitive. You mentioned the girl you worked with is a sensitive. I think he has some similar type of abilities. And he is part of a group called Ethereal Wells in the UK. And he shared this story, so I'll go ahead and read this. I think it's an interesting story. So the most eerie experience came a few years ago while I was investigating Pengersick Castle in Cornwall. It is one of the most haunted in the UK, and I went with no expectation, though as always, I believe that this is the best way to approach paranormal investigating. During the night, we had footsteps above us in locked rooms and cold spots, but it was during a trio vigil that the strangest experience I ever had occurred. We were in the bedroom where a supposed death had taken place, and we were conducting some calling out sessions in crystal divination. Now, during the session, I had started to feel very cold and could sense the presence of a very loving spirit of a maid who used to work at the castle in the 18th century, and he thinks it was a girl named Elizabeth. She started to commune with me through my spirit guides, telling me details of her life and how also that she knew I could sense her. I stood next to the bed when suddenly every single hair on my body stood up as I felt the spirit of something starting to come forward to me. As I was closing my eyes, calling her forward, I felt two hands touch my hips and run her hands up and down my back. She then put her head on my back, and I was told by my friend who was a medium that I reminded her of someone she once loved and she wanted me to know. It was the most beautiful but yet spine-tingling experience I've ever had. Thank you so much to Andrew for sharing that story with us. Wow, there's a couple of interesting aspects to that story. One is he kind of had mixed emotions there with that story, Dorie. He one felt kind of a loving presence, but he also had this spine-chilling experience over it. So it's kind of interesting how he had two different kinds of emotions with this encounter. That's what I thought was interesting about this one. A little bit creepy because, it's kind of weird whenever you get touched by something. And, I have a story here shortly in just a minute I'm going to share with that. But, this one was interesting in that he kind of had mixed emotions on the experience. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to go ahead and share a story that I had. And, he mentioned being touched and, I can't imagine having something rub their hand up and down your back like that. And I think that would be kind of a creepy experience to have. One of the experiences that I had was, of course, we were investigating in a location, and I'll just say it's a museum. I won't say where the location is or the specific name of the location because, of course, it is a confidential location, and so we can't share the specifics of the location. I was downstairs in the basement. Now, Dorie, you've been to this location as well. You've investigated there with me. We have an area we call base camp, and that's where we set up our audio monitoring equipment. And, if we have a CCTV camera, that sort of thing, we set it up there. Now, everybody else was upstairs at base camp, and I was downstairs alone. And I was doing an EVP session, and I was asking questions. And all of a sudden I went silent for about a minute or two, just listening for noises and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden I heard this noise, and I'm sitting down in that chair at the bottom of the stairs to my left, and then I started to feel this really strong energy. And this is the kind of energy you feel where it's head to toe, goosebumps, kind of a static electricity kind of feeling. And then I felt something reach out and touch me on the arm. And then no sooner than it was there, the energy was gone. So whatever had touched me was gone shortly after. And that was the end of the experience. The interesting thing about the experience is I felt really drained energy-wise after that occurred. And so I radioed back up to base camp and told the guys what had happened. And I went back up to base camp, and one of the other investigators there just told me kind of take it easy and kind of regroup. And, you know, again, I didn't think it was a scary experience. But just like Andrew's experience, being touched in a certain sense can be a little bit unsettling. And I know you've had a few experiences, Dorie, of your own of being touched. And I don't know if there's any of those you want to share or not, but that was my first experience of actually having the sensation of something touching me. And I know nobody else was there, so had to have been a ghost or apparition that was responsible for it.
Very interesting.
Yes, and it was, and you know, again, that was my first experience where I had been touched, so it was really kind of a compelling experience for me, because I think I was almost a year into, you know, working with the paranormal group and doing paranormal investigating. That was the first such time that had happened to me. And so, you know, whenever you get touched, it's always a little bit unsettling. Although, yes, you know, as I started thinking back about it, I thought, wow, what an amazing experience it was, though. It didn't feel like anything bad. It almost felt like it was just something trying to get my attention to say hello. You know, here I am, and then that was it. And again, then the energy was gone, and that was it. So, you know, that's my story of being touched. And so, you know, I appreciate Andrew sharing his story. It was quite an interesting one. So there's my story. And Dorie, any other stories here that you want to share that may be along those lines?
You know, we were just at a location, you and I, on Friday, where I've only, like, you know, being touched in an investigation or anything, for me, that doesn't happen. It's never happened. So the one time that it did, I was very alarmed. I'm not going to say where this location is because I can't. We were on an investigation. It's a public place, very public place.
Very public.
And it was closed. We did a late night investigation. The place was closed. And let's just say they house a lot of antiques in this location. And I was there with 3 other females in the investigation. My back was towards a wall that had certain antiques. And nobody was behind me. The other 3 females were in front of me. And I felt a finger, like not just the light brushing, like a finger, someone with pressure run their finger down my shoulder blade. And it was so concrete that I jumped. I jumped and I looked back and I was like, who just touched me? Nobody was there. And the thing is, we went to investigate a few other areas in this location, and I came back a couple hours later, standing in about the same area I was earlier, and we were wrapping up for the night, just finishing up some certain things, and once again, same shoulder blade, and it just felt like a fingertip. It wasn't a full hand, it was a fingertip, pushed me on the same shoulder blade, and I thought, well, okay. That was the second thing, but
you got my attention.
Yeah, so to have things that strong, like I said, that has never happened to me ever again. It was a very cool experience, because it's very rare. One of the other things I want to share is another location. Like I said, we can't really disclose where this location is, but anything you can imagine in a paranormal investigation has happened there.
Yes, absolutely.
It's fantastic. It is so fantastic. In this location, I have had one female and I were standing on a second floor, Everybody else was at base camp down below, and we always hear voices in the distant, or
disembodied voices.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Disembodied voices. That's a very regular, normal thing, especially in this location. But this one particular evening, she and I were up on this floor, and it's as if it was right in my ear, a dog growl. It wasn't faint, it wasn't disembodied, it was in my ear. And I just looked to my left at the female I was with, and she looked at me, and we both shook our heads up and down and said, mm-hmm.
Yep, we both heard it.
We both heard it. I mean, I can go on about stories in this location, but when it's so strong and so in your face, it's amazing. It's, like I said, and it doesn't happen very often, because if you have done paranormal investigating, a lot of times you're just sitting in the dark and it's boring.
Yes, absolutely.
And
we've had many nights like
right, and a lot of the times the evidence you get is through hours and hours of EVP and watching footage. But so when it happens in real time, it's very exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It definitely gets your blood flowing, and it's exciting, and especially just what you mentioned. There's so much downtime where you're just sitting there in the dark and you're bored, and then something significant like that happens, and you're like, wow, that absolutely blew me away. And I've went through, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've went through this emotion where you start to try and rationalize it, and you start to think, did this really happen?
Yeah,
and,
you play it back, you try to, well, what could it have been? And there are times when you just can't explain.
You can't explain it, and even though you try and rationalize it, sometimes you just can't. And for the listener, if you go back to episode 2, the strange occurrences episode, we talk about a lot of the experiences. I had a couple of other investigators from the group on there, and we talked about some of the most amazing experiences we've had at this location. And so if you ever get a chance, go back and check that episode out. You'll hear some of the truly amazing accounts and experiences people have had at the location Dorie was just talking about. So thanks for sharing that story, Dorie. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a short break, and we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and we were just talking about a story that was shared from a listener, and we're going to share another listener story. And Dorie's going to go ahead and read this one. This is a pretty interesting story, and I think this one has some creep factor to it as well, Dorie. So go ahead and take it away.
Right, this one comes from listener Fastine Bastige of Colorado. He sent this him or her. Fastine, do we know?
You know, I think it's a guy.
Okay.
And he's on my Facebook page, so I do think it's a guy. And he is out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And again, this one I think is one of the best ones. I really like this one.
Well, when I read it, it was pretty fantastic. So here we go. The 1991 United 585 crash site is right outside my backyard. The entire neighborhood experiences apparitions and voices that can't be explained. One wanders around my house all the time. He paces back and forth across my deck pretty much every day. I've seen him walk past my office and enter my bedroom on more than one occasion. My grandson saw him in the basement a couple times. That's a great story.
It is. It's an amazing story. So it's one, and I've got a similar story I'm going to share in just a minute, but what I want to say about this one is there's different theories about the types of hauntings out there. There's, the theories of intelligent versus residual hauntings. Some people believe that residual hauntings are kind of like something being recorded in the earth or being recorded somewhere in the atmosphere, and it just is kind of like a loop playing back and back and back and back, time and time again. Maybe back and back wasn't the best way to say that, but it's almost like on a loop. Something being played time and time again. I'm wondering, I don't know if this would fall in that category or not. And then it also begs the question, after you die, and I'm going to get into, this is going to be a segue into another story I'm going to share here shortly, but after you die, and specifically if it's a traumatic event, you die from a traumatic event, whether it's a car crash, a plane crash in this case. And I think it was over 80 people died when I looked this plane crash, when I looked it up and read about it. I think it was well over 80 people. Planes coming in on approach, and something happened, and I don't remember what it was. In fact, I don't think they ever knew for sure the details about why the plane crashed. But it's almost like the guy, maybe he doesn't know he's dead. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I feel with something, well, it could be that sort of a thing where he doesn't know he's dead. It's, all the emotional trauma that happened. It can be sort of like a Gettysburg thing where it's so traumatic and it's got that imprint left in time, and it's just repeating.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just not even he doesn't know he's dead. It's just a repeat, like on a loop, like you were saying, just recorded in time because it had such an impact, and there was such trauma on that when it happened. And I've heard stories of people who live around this site, so I'm really glad that this Fastine sent the story in.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. It's kind of a short one, but when I read that story, I kind of just got chills down my spine because I thought, wow, can you imagine knowing what happened there and then seeing an individual that you believe was possibly a crash victim, pacing back and forth. I think it would be a little bit frightening at first, but it almost seems like, Fastine's kind of got used to this.
Right.
It's a common occurrence. And the other interesting thing is he said other neighbors have experienced strange activity as well. And so to segue into my next story, it's kind of an interesting story like this one. So I had on episode 33, I had Stephen Howley Martin join me on the show, and he's the author of the book, The Afterlife of the Whole Truth. And in that book, he shares a story about a friend of his, a Frenchman, who inherited a castle. And the interesting thing about this story is the castle had not been inhabited since prior to World War II. And so he and his wife, he had done well in business, and he had a lot of money, and he and his wife spent a lot of time renovating it and fixing it up. And at nighttime, when they would go to bed, they started hearing screaming, a man screaming, like he was somebody suffering in pain, in anguish, and they would hear this oftentimes when they go to bed, or sometimes it would wake them up in the middle of the night, and or they'd hear it early in the morning right after they're waking up. So that's kind of the interesting thing about this. Really, the only time they would hear it would be at night. Now, I think Stephen's theory on this is perhaps that's when you're, it's when it's the most quiet. It's kind of when your brain is shutting, is a little bit less active. You don't have a million things sometimes going on in your mind. Kind of like when people, things happen to them in their dreams. They see a family member in their dreams, that sort of thing. But this is where the story gets real interesting, Dorie. So after that activity was going on for a while, they finally had decided, that the husband said, this is enough, They were renovating the place. They got to where they thought was the source of the wailing of the man screaming out, and it was this brick wall that had been put up in one of the basement areas. So they promptly had the brick wall removed, and behind the brick wall was the skeleton of a human.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, dun dun dun.
That's very Edgar Allan Poe.
It's textbook. I mean, it's something you would think you would see
Right.
in a horror movie. And it's really, the creep factor on this one's pretty high. But the interesting thing is, they say they gave it a proper Christian burial, and the activity went away. Now, this also is kind of in line with Fastine's story in that it begs the question: did this person not know they were dead? And in fact, they kind of theorized that maybe somebody had, put this person there. Maybe they knocked him out. Maybe they tortured him and left him there. They built the wall behind him, and this person, died and didn't realize they were dead. Otherwise, you would think they would easily have just passed on and moved on out of the area once they passed on. So once they actually did the burial, though, the activity completely subsided. And so, that was an interesting story, and I thought it was kind of had some similarities to this story here, in that It kind of makes you wonder once people pass on, if it's a traumatic event, if they sometimes just don't know they've died. And I've also heard it said by psychics and mediums that time kind of stands still after you die. So maybe that happened 200 years ago, and to this individual, it didn't seem like it was a lot of time had transpired. Again, this is all just conjecture and theory, but interesting story, and certainly kind of a creepy story as well. All right, so we hope you enjoyed that one. Anything you want to add on that one, Dorie?
No, I mean, it's a great story. A
Because
very great gothic horror story.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back to episode 33, in my interview with Stephen Howley Martin, he talks about this story and shared so many other stories in the book that were fascinating. And so if you want, go back and catch that episode. It was a good one. I'm going to go ahead and read now. We've been talking about ghost stories, Dorie. We've got a few other stories that are interesting. Now, Andrea from Salt Lake City, I don't know the last name, she shared a couple of stories with me. Now, one was a Sasquatch or Bigfoot story, and the second one is a UFO story. And, of course, my show is about all things paranormal, so I thought it would be, worth it to actually share these stories. They're fairly short. So I'll go ahead and talk about the first one, and this is the Sasquatch story that Andrea shared. And she said, I was on an Indian reservation in southern Utah, and my gent friend and I both saw a Sasquatch. It was in the middle of the day, and it was about 100 feet away. He was about 7 to 8 feet tall, going by the height of my gent friend, who was about 6'2", and it was crossing a dried up stream and looked straight at us. I should have been terrified, but wasn't. It didn't seem to care that we were there or want to hurt us. He only noticed us and then just kept moving on his business. We camped there that night, and I wasn't scared of him. The coyotes' howls at night, however, were actually more scary to me because the look on the Bigfoot's face was actually a peaceful one. He was covered in fur on his body and a bit on his face. So that's the whole story there. Again, it's a fairly short one. The interesting thing about this account, Dorie, is I've had other Bigfoot researchers on the show, and they've talked about either stories that have been shared with him and shared with them from others' Bigfoot's accounts. And as far as dimensions, height, that sort of thing, a lot of people have reported seeing Bigfoot being around 7-8 foot high, some hair on the face. So it is kind of consistent with some of the other Bigfoot stories some of the other Bigfoot stories I've heard. And the other interesting thing about this one was she didn't seem to be afraid at all. In fact, the fact that she mentioned she was more afraid of the coyote howls, is kind of telling right there. And that's what's interesting about some of the Bigfoot stories I've heard. Some people are very alarmed, and other people say, no, I felt it was very peaceful, and I wasn't alarmed. So that's the interesting thing about this one, I think, more than anything, is that she really felt like it was peaceful and wasn't anything to be afraid of. Now, the second story that Andrea shared is actually a UFO account she had in Salt Lake City. So I'll go ahead and read this one, and then we're going to segue into a short story after that. All right, so her story is, I have also seen a UFO hovering near the Wasatch Mountains, right at the Wasatch Front. I was with numerous cousins, and we all saw it. We were at a home above the state capitol, so we could easily see all of the city. It was coming north toward us, hugging the base of the mountain, and it was actually like you would think it would look, like a disc-shaped object, and had a row of colored lights in the middle of it flashing and moving around the girth of the craft. It was there for a long time, but then left in a flash and didn't return. So, interesting story. What didn't get shared in this one is whether or not she heard anything. We've had a lot of UFO accounts out there where people said, there was no noise. There was no signs of propulsion. She didn't mention anything about that, but in terms of the shape and the lights, it's similar to other UFO accounts that are out there. Now, Dorie, you and I have both heard this story.
And I've heard it my whole life.
You've heard it several times. Your parents had a UFO experience. And the interesting thing, as far as the physical characteristics, do you think it's kind of similar to this story? In terms of, the lights and, being kind of a disc-shaped object.
Yes. I don't know if theirs was more, my parents described a disc shape. I think they had a lot of, it's with the lights. I always remember them telling me about the lights. And I feel like you can tell the story better than I can.
Yeah, and your dad just relayed this story to me about a month ago when he was over at the house. And the interesting thing about this one was the light seemed to be in the center of the object, and it sounded like it probably was more like a dish-shaped object, the traditional dish-shaped object you hear a lot of people describe in UFO encounters. But they also said they were red lights that were rotating counter to each other. So one rotating clockwise, the other rotating counterclockwise. And the thing was hovering for a while, almost like you'd see a helicopter hovering. Now, the interesting thing about this is they got out of their car to look at it. They were on a back country road between Corpus Christi. I believe they were on their way to San Antonio. Is that
That's
the
right.
way you remember it?
Yes.
So, yeah, it was a back country road. And back then, as your dad described it, they didn't have the interstate going from Corpus Christi to San Antonio, Texas. So this was a back road. And they saw this thing hovering real low altitude. And surprisingly, I don't know if I would have got out of my car, but I believe your mom, I don't remember if she said your father got out of the car, because this is where she piped in on the story. She got out of the car, and they were kind of watching the object. And the interesting thing is she said there was absolutely no sound. Absolutely no sound. And so that's similar to what a lot of other people have said about UFO sightings. They don't hear any sound. She said there was no signs of propulsion. Like a helicopter, you're going to hear rotors. You're probably going to see rotors. I think it was kind of dark out. I don't remember if it was totally dark or if it was still light. I don't remember those specifics. But there was no sound. And then as they got back in the car and started driving, it looked like it was following him. And that's the other thing that was interesting. I started thinking, well, I think one of the first questions I asked was, do you guys believe you were abducted? And of course, what was their answer when we said that? No, we don't believe we were abducted.
Now I'm going to pipe in and say, yes, they were. At least I know my mother was abducted.
So the interesting thing about this is, you'll hear people say, we had missing time. We couldn't account for 2 hours. And that's one of the first questions I asked your mother. Now, did you have missing time during this experience? And of course, she said, no, there was no missing time that she was aware of. But it did seem to be following them, and then eventually it just seemed to disappear. So for their sake, thank God, I don't think, maybe they didn't get abducted. Maybe they did. Who knows? But
maybe they were glamored. Maybe the aliens or they glamored them into, I don't know. This never happened.
Maybe they erased their memory, but yeah.
I know she was abducted.
There was no missing time there. That was the interesting thing. Now we got another listener story to share. Dorie, you want to share this one? This is kind of interesting. Involves a pet.
Yes, this comes to us from Sally Jo Talbot McNichol. She said, I provided on the Utah Haunted Places and People Facebook group. Sorry, I'm just reading what the little disclaimer thing says. She did give us permission to share the story, word for word. I think the most paranormal experience I have had is when my Great Dane Piper was a puppy, and she seemed to always be playing with someone in our backyard. My granddaughter, age 20 at that time, said she had seen a stick fly from nowhere, and Piper went and got it. But the most chilling is when I was watching her play, trying to capture what my granddaughter shared with me. I watched her pick up a ball and put it in one of the holes she dug in the ground. Here it came. It popped out of the hole at her. Not hard. I couldn't believe it. So I watched a few more times, and it did it a few more times. The thing is, this was a large ball for a large dog, and it was very heavy for her to carry. So, very interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Flying objects.
Flying objects involved, and
animals.
She didn't mention whether the dog was startled, though. I didn't hear that part.
No.
It seems like she was startled at it, and perhaps the daughter, but she didn't mention whether the dog was startled. So that begs the question: did the dog sense it? Some people believe that animals experience and know when spirits are there. So you have to wonder: did the dog freak out a little bit?
Right.
And this is a segue into a story because we're talking about pets, and a lot of people believe, spiritual energy associated with pets, that our pets pass on and they are still with us. And I was interviewing Karen Anderson, and I think it was episode 32. She wrote the book, The Amazing Afterlife of Animals, and she's an animal communicator. And so she is a psychic medium and an animal communicator. And she was relaying how our animals communicate with us once they pass on. Maybe they appear in a dream. Sometimes they appear in visions. And the funny thing, Dorie, was the moment she mentioned visions, I had this vision of my dog pop right into my head. And Pita,
Yes.
She just passed. We had to actually have her put down about a year ago. And one of the things she loved to do was she loved to stand up on her hind legs, and especially if she wanted something, she was trying to get your attention. So what was the vision that popped into my head? My dog sitting up on her hind legs looking at me. And it was kind of sad, but on the other hand, it almost made me feel like maybe she's saying hello, or maybe my mind's playing tricks on me and I just thought of that. I don't know, I'm not sure, but it was really strange how it happened so quickly after she mentioned that. Now, I mentioned to Karen as we were recording the episode, and she said, I think you just had a vision of your dog there. So that was interesting. But and then another time I was actually going to the bathroom in my hallway, and my dogs, I could always hear them running because they had, their little nails were always kind of long. We probably should have trimmed them better, but you hear them running down the hallway with their nails. And I hear this noise, and I heard it about probably 4 or 5 times, the noise I used to hear when my dogs would run down the hallway, and their nails are clipping along. And I thought, did I just hear one of my dogs? Both of them are passed on, sisters. And I thought about it, and I mentioned it to my wife, and she said, no, I think you were hearing things. So just a couple of anecdotal stories about, my experiences. And, the one was the interview with Karen, and then that one. You have an interesting story.
Yes, I do. It's a quick story.
Okay, great.
This is my friend Judy, she was one who pulled me in the graveyard by my collar. I was visiting her at her parents' house. They were having a party, and she was living there while she was transitioning to buying a home, so she was staying there, and we were in the basement standing at the foot of the stairs. And as we're standing there talking, I saw a cat between her feet, and I thought it was her parents' cat. And I go, oh, look, there's the cat. And I looked down, and there's no cat there. I'm like, I saw the cat, but then the cat wasn't there, and it was a black cat. And she said, the cat's white. We have a white cat. I said, well, I just saw a black cat between your feet. And she said, and she looked at me with big eyes, and she goes, I got to tell you something. While she had been staying at her parents' house, she stayed in the basement, one of the bedrooms in the basement. And she says at night, she sleeps and the door is shut. And she said this had happened all the time. She'd be asleep, lying in bed, and it would felt like a little animal would jump on the bed and walk around. And if you have little animals and they walk on the bed, you know what their little paws feel like.
Sure.
And so when I said, well, maybe I just saw your ghost cat. So, yeah, that's a pretty cool story.
That's interesting. That is very interesting. So, and then the fact that she relayed that to you about her experience even validates it that much more. Great story. Thanks for sharing that. So I got a real short story to share, and this was shared to me by Gabrielle Panas of Salt Lake City, Utah, and she shared this on the Facebook page, and I'll just read the story as it was relayed to me. Well, about 3 weeks ago, I watched a Coke can move from one side of my coffee table to another and move its way back. My son and I both watched it and had my friend, who's a Reiki specialist, come and cleanse the house. She also claims this possessed her dog and that her spirit guides have been with her ever since. So that is the story. Interesting because this is kind of a poltergeist type story.
Thank you. I felt Tangina walk in the room. Isn't there a scene with the Coke can in Poltergeist too?
There may be. I would have to go back and see. I'm not sure if I remember that or not. But The interesting thing about this one is she also relayed a message to me that she was hoping to get some help with the house because she'd had other activity going on. Apparently her dog, so this going back to animals, she said her dog was freaked out and, well, she even mentioned possessed. And she was looking for help. Well, of course, that's not the sort of thing I do. I don't go in and cleanse houses, and that's really what she was looking for. So I did relay her to another psychic and medium that I knew of, and I'm not sure what has happened since then. Gabrielle, I sure hope that whatever activity was going on there has been cleared up and things feel safe again in your home, but thank you for sharing that story. All right, so Dorie, if you want, unless you have anything you want to add on that one.
No.
Yeah, I mean, that one's
a great story. I don't know how I would have handled
I think I would have
that.
I might have walked out. I don't know.
I can handle it if I don't live at the location.
Yes, I agree.
But if that happens in my own home, I'd be a little unnerved.
I would be definitely unnerved. And I've always said that too. I've always said I love going out to locations to try and capture evidence of ghostly activity. I just don't want it going on in my own home.
Right. I want to sleep in peace.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I would be unsettled by that as well, for sure. Okay, so we've got another listener story, and Dorie's going to go ahead and read this, and this is from a friend of ours, so go ahead and take it away, Dorie.
Yes, this is from our friend Steve of Ogden, Utah. You know who you are.
Steve, you know who you are.
Yep. He says, and he's told me lots of great stories about this old house he used to live in. At this old home, he and his wife had experienced some unusual activity, such as things turning up missing and then mysteriously, suddenly reappearing. In the old house, this is what he says, in the old house where we were sitting on the couch, and his wife screamed and then said something, slapped her on the back. I started taking pictures right away, but didn't capture anything. I wish we would have thought to see it through, see if there was a handprint on her back.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been a good time to just, hey, let's look at whether there's a mark there and take a picture of it.
Right.
But in the fog of the incident, it's easy to say you would think of that, but I realized she was probably pretty startled.
Right.
He was probably pretty startled that this had happened, and knowing that they already know there's activity going on in the house, sometimes it's hard to think of something like that right away. And so that's kind of one of those, hindsight's 20/20. You think, dang it,
right.
I wish I would have pulled out the camera and took a picture of her back to see if there was a mark left there.
Yeah.
As paranormal investigators, that's probably one of the things we would do if somebody got scratched or physically, we think got physically harmed. And that's probably one of the things we would do. But yeah, good comment, Steve. I think I would have done the same thing. I would have probably been kind of a little bit freaked out by the situation, and I doubt I would have thought of that right away either. So, but interesting story, and he did relay that there was a lot of activity going on there. I didn't get the sense that they thought any of it was harmful until this story. You have to wonder. Was it just trying to get her attention, say hello? I don't know how hard it actually struck her. But either way, that's unnerving if you're sitting at your couch and something out of the blue hits you.
Right.
So.
Well, a little side note to this, about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, Steve sent me a picture. They were doing some remodeling in the home because his child moved into that house. He moved to a new house, but his daughter lives there now. And when they were remodeling, they came across an obituary clipping within the wall, I believe. And so he called and says, "Can you look this up? Can you find this?" I said, "I can't, but I know someone who can." And it's our friend, Jennifer Jones, who runs the Dead History. She's a parahistorian, and she's got magic powers. I don't know how she does this, but she can find anything, anyone, before the end of the day.
Yeah, she's a good researcher.
She's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't anything creepy. I can't even remember what it was, but I think we were all hoping just to find that this person died tragically in the house, and this is why they haunt. And we wanted some crazy story, but I think he was just some accountant.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting.
I'm not sure. And I don't think they ever lived there. I think also that's what happened is they never lived in that house, that person who was attached to that obituary clipping. So
interesting.
But I mean, that would have been really cool.
That would have been. Well, at least she was able to dig into history there. And oh, by the way, the story I mentioned about debunking the story about Flo getting hit by a car, Jennifer Jones was actually the one that told the true story about how Flo died.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at her book right now on my bookshelf.
All right. Well, we got one more good story to share, and yes, it is a Bigfoot story. However, it has some creep factor here. It's a great story. Now, this story was relayed to me, sent to me by Jeff Benoit, and he is out of Kent, Washington. Now, Jeff is a kind of a Bigfoot researcher, and he goes out in the woods, and him and his friends, and they try and find evidence of Bigfoot. I'm going to go ahead and read this story, and it's a long one, but I think it's a good one, and hopefully you'll enjoy this one. All right. Actually, Dorie, I think you were going to read this, weren't you?
You can read it if you'd like.
All right. Well, you know what? Since I already mentioned I'd read it, I'll go right into it then. Okay, so Friday, August 9th, 2019, so this is a really recent story. Myself and 3 friends all last minute decided to take off on an impromptu last minute trip in the night to go do some Bigfoot searching. We all love the outdoors and are into cryptids. We all met up at my place and set off from Federal Way, Washington at around 7 p.m. We had a clear and specific place in mind where we were headed. It is a place I have camped at for over a week before and not far from where one of us had an encounter a few years ago. It was a dark and weird night, and I say that because there was only overcast and a storm rolling in causing it to be pitch black darkness. No moonlight, no starlight, nothing. We were in very close proximity to Mount Rainier National Park off of Skate Creek Road, say that 3 times real fast, and onto a Forest Service Road 52, and then onto 84 in the High Rock Lookout area. We parked the van in a very specific spot I was familiar with because I had camped this exact spot for over a week just a couple of years ago. By this point, the sky is flashing from a lightning storm in the distance, followed by no sound of thunder. It was way off from us still at this point. However, the sky and cloud cover was acting as a projector of sorts in that these flashes were having a strobing effect, I guess you could say. It was a quick flash to where you could see around only for a split second. Very creepy and mood setting, but we didn't care, and we were excited just to get away from work for the weekend and to be out here, just the guys, even though it was an out and back type of thing. We get out our gear, such as our firearms, jackets, and headlamps, and after we finish gearing up, it is at this point we shut the van off and all the light sources and really take in just how quiet and dark, and I mean eerily quiet, and the darkest you can think of dark, the type of darkness where you can really hardly even see in your hand right in front of you. The only light now was coming from the lightning. We then turned the key to the auxiliary setting and dial the car stereo up to the maximum setting and proceeded to play some vocalizations. It was a short audio clip that we played at least 4 to 6 times and waited in silence and nothing. We then left the van and headed off on foot down the service road. My buddies were a little nervous, which was understandable. The atmosphere was a little unsettling. However, I was not at all nervous or anything because this place was familiar to me, as essentially I lived there for a week a few years ago. I know where the road leads to, and that when you reach the end, you will know that it dead ends. I am now in front with a headlamp, and my buddies are behind me and not being the quietest of people, and that's when they stop and say they hear something to the right, as though something was following us and was walking when we walked. I told them that they are crazy and they aren't hearing anything, and we laugh it off and proceed down the road. Pretty uneventful at this point. We reach the end of this road, which opens to a clearing and clearly a spot people have shot at in the past. By this point, that storm is over the top of us and the rain is coming down, and the timing of lightning to thunderclap is only a couple of seconds. We decide we better head back to the van. Minus the weather and the quote thing pacing us, nothing eventful at all really happened. We got back to the van, threw our gear in, changed our upper layers,
because by this point we were soaked. We get in and we start off to explore deeper into the forest and find another spot to park and search. Weather wasn't really agreeing with us on that, in that it was getting late. Next thing you know, we zigged when we should have zagged and ended up on a very primitive road. We ended up turned around and lost for a while until our driver found his way out and back onto the main Skate Creek Road. But let's go back for a second. Me and another friend are in the back seats, and the driver and the co-pilot windows are down because we are all smokers, so the heat is blasting. My friend sitting beside me asked me to shut the windows in the back because we are wet still and it is chilly, very chilly back there. So to be clear, we are in a van with sliding doors on both sides, and the only windows in the back that are open are only an inch outwards for venting. He tells us that they are closed, and my buddy is now getting pissed because clearly there was a breeze and it clearly sounded like they were open. Finally, we just dropped the window thing and proceeded onwards. Sorry, I only bring up the windows and all that because of what happens next. As I said before, beside the weather and us getting lost, nothing eventful had really happened. That is until we got back to my house. It was there that we discovered the cause of the breeze and the reason for the whole window argument. One of the van's back windows had been broken. We only really discovered this as we were getting gear out of the van and noticed there was broken glass. Glass? WTF, what had happened? That window didn't break while we were anywhere near, on, in, or around the van. This is a window that only opens outwards on one side and the other sits in a metal housing track from top to bottom, and the bottom of this track is bent outwards. Our initial thoughts were, did something throw something at the window as we were on that walk? Did someone smash it and steal something? We looked and nothing was missing at all. No bags, no ammo, no weapons, nothing. Everything was accounted for. After some thinking, we realized that whomever or whatever had broken that window would have to have grabbed the bottom corner and pulled it outwards and popped it. That would explain why that metal housing was bent. What we noticed next was there was glass on top of the van. We are all in disbelief at this point and asking ourselves what could have happened and when and where. It's now 3 a.m. and we are discovering this, and we are all tired and wanting to get home, but yet still talk about what could have happened. Once we grabbed our stuff and shut the hatch, that is when I noticed it. We only noticed it because of how dirty that back windshield was, and the light of my house down the drive was illuminating it. What we discovered was a handprint with clear fingerprints in the thumb, the index finger, and palm on the glass. The print is huge, and from the base of the palm to the ridge just below the fingers was as big as my hand. In that and around that print, we were able to recover a couple of hair samples. What had happened last night? Did those vocalizations send out a distress call that was answered and investigated as though one of their own was injured or trapped in that van? I don't know. Wow. That's a long one, but an interesting one.
Yes.
So, they sounds like the friends heard some noises, but nothing really significant going on while they were there. And this is kind of one of these things that reminds me, Dorie, like when we go on an investigation and, we're investigating a location and nothing is happening, and it's kind of boring, and, maybe a few noises here and there, and then we get home and we play back the audio recorder and we got voices and things are happening. So this kind of reminds me of that. But, amazing that, one, that's unfortunate that their window got broken that way. Two, that they had a handprint there and noticed that. And three, they're trying to scratch their heads and figure out why the heck did this actually happen? What triggered this, and, what brought this on? Either they made this thing mad, or, like you said, it was looking for... maybe it thought it was a distress signal. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one?
I'm going with distress signal.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a possible explanation and one of the best ones. But definitely a creep factor there on that story. Again, not a ghost story, but it's a Bigfoot story and an interesting one. And Yeah, it's one of those where you just go, again, it reminds me of when we review evidence or review audio, and we catch voices on an audio recorder that we can't explain, and then you're like, wow, nothing really happened, but I got these voices, that sort of thing. It's kind of after the fact. But great story, Jeff. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And in the interest of time, we did have a couple of other stories that we never got to. And actually, Jeff Benoit shared another Bigfoot story with us. It's another lengthy one. But, Dorie, in the interest of time, I think we're going to have to call it good on this one. Any last parting shots? Any other things you want to mention before we wrap it up here on this special Halloween episode?
No, I just want to say thank you to all the listeners who sent in stories. We really appreciate them. And thank you for having me back on the show.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun, Dorie, and you get to be on the fun ones.
I do.
We got to talk about paranormal shows and poke fun at some things on the last one, which was a long time ago. Again,
episode 3, yeah.
Going all the way back to episode 3. We're now on episode 40. Hey, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the show. Please make sure you tune in on next episode when I will have Timothy Scolian, ghost photographer, joining me on the show. Don't miss that episode. That should be a good one. He's got some great ghost photography he's captured at Williamsburg, which is a famous Civil War site. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for listening to us. Happy Halloween. Hope you all have a great Halloween, and have a great night, everybody.